New videos every day. Life, wisdom.
One of your first videos was entitled The Real Cause of Bipolar Disorder. So maybe you just want to explain to us what you believe the cause of bipolar disorder is, or what you discuss in that video.
Okay. Well, like I said, it was my first video, so I needed to make a mark. I needed a punchy title. So I thought, well, the real cause of bipolar disorder, that'll get some attention, you know. And the reason I made that video is what I found was online, there's still a lot of people who believe that bipolar disorder is rooted in genetics. So, you've had this problem, you've got a chemical imbalance, it's rooted in your genes. But they're not given any other understanding, you know. And what I found in my own case, my own spiritual experience and the experiences of my nieces and that of many people online that I've talked to, is there seems to be almost like a constellation of forces which come together at one point in your life, which just sort of turn your life upside down. You know, and we'll call those triggers. So, for example, in my first crisis, I had left my job, moved cities, back from Vancouver to Toronto, my original hometown. I was applying for new work. I had had a scuba diving accident 2 months before, and I was having many new ideas regarding spirituality. And I was in a self-help seminar, okay, which was very intensive. And in the middle of that self-help seminar, it just went poof, you know. I also had some emotional issues in my life that I'd never really dealt with. Had a few issues with my mom. There was an abortion in my past that I'd felt quite guilty about. These kind of things were sort of laying beneath the surface as well. Yeah. So all of that comes together, and when all of this sort of twists around in your head at the same time, all of a sudden you can just sort of pop, and you're in this other reality. You know, which I've called and other psychologists have referred to as an ego collapse. So anybody who's in the middle of an ego collapse enters an acute psychosis, and that acute psychosis is often labeled today as bipolar 1, mania becoming psychosis. In the past, it would have been referred to as schizophrenia.
Okay. So what you're saying is that this idea of a chemical imbalance or a genetic root behind mental illness, really that there's no scientific, evidence to back that up at all. So your perspective is that actually this kind of, what did you say, ego collapse, or in one of the previous videos, you kind of described it as a spiritual awakening, that we could have all of these different, maybe like traumatic events or painful events, things in our life that maybe just kind of all come together at one time and kind of just maybe get the best of us.
And it doesn't need to be painful. It can often be just events of rapid change. Like, for example, winning the lottery could be a cause an ego collapse. Okay. And another great example is, do you remember, and he's a famous YouTube guy, Jason Russell, the creator of the Coney 212 program. Yeah. Well, he entered an acute psychosis. Okay, that's what if you saw the video of him on the street, he was naked, swearing at the devil. Apparently he started masturbating. He's pounding on the ground, yelling at the devil, yelling at God. He was in the midst of an acute psychosis. What triggered this psychosis? It's so obvious. It was this instant fame that he had and the adoration and the criticism that went with it.
Right.
And it just became too much for him. And there's a guy who's fully functioning, obviously very successful, with that video just went crazy. But it took the best of him. And I think that anybody in his situation could have went into an acute psychosis. And I saw part of the interview with Oprah. He said one of the other things that came up was that he had seen so many children in Africa just, with these horrific lives, running from being murdered, forced to kill their children, or forced to kill their parents, all of that kind of thing. And that was sitting in there too. Right. So he had been traumatized by his trips to Africa, right. And then it just, this one moment in time and pop,
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly. So this idea of an ego collapse or this kind of, crisis that you come to, Is this something that, I mean, obviously in your case, you seem to be perfectly fine and functional now. But what is, I guess in society, oftentimes when somebody has one of those incidents, it's very quick that they're assigned a mental health diagnosis, like bipolar or schizophrenia or any of those other things.
Yeah, and then it becomes very confusing because people are trusting, the authority figures of our society, psychiatrists, to tell them what's wrong with them. And what the psychiatrist is saying doesn't match what's going on inside, how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. And their feelings, thoughts, and emotions become completely dismissed for the first time in their life. You're a normal person, people listen to you, they treat you with respect. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in this different world where people don't even look at you, and you don't know why, and then you're just sort of marginalized for the rest of your life. Anytime you become emotional, it's because you're bipolar. Anytime you argue, it's because you're bipolar. It's a really sad situation, and it can be avoided, I believe, in many cases.
Right. So maybe talk a little bit about what you mean in terms of what would be the alternate course from going down this route of receiving a mental health diagnosis, starting on medications, which is pretty much the next step from receiving a diagnosis. What's kind of the alternate path that you would present to people?
Okay. Well, in my own understanding of these conditions now, I see it as sort of a repressed or blocked subconscious energy that comes from the accumulation of our lives and everything that's happened to us. And that energy needs to come out or needs to be processed in some way. Mm-hmm. So if you have someone who's in an acute psychosis, which can be quite dangerous, but they're in a protected environment, like say a bungalow, right? With not a lot that could cause them personal harm around. So you would want to take away things like fireplace equipment, guns, knives, anything like that, and just put all that away. Okay, out of harm's reach, and then have them protected by compassionate friends, 2 at a time at all times, and then let that go for a period of, say, 3 or 4 days. A lot of the materials can be worked through, And this is coming from the work of Dr. Stan Grof, who has interpreted these kind of experiences as spiritual emergencies,
Right.
Yeah.
And so do you have personal experience, I guess, either having somebody walk you through this kind of therapy sort of thing that you just mentioned, or that you've actually worked with other people to help them through one of these, maybe kind of what might be called a psychotic episode or a psychotic break?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I really do a lot of work online is, first, I was very lucky. For some reason, I had my break late in life at 30, I got out of the hospital quite quickly. So I was somehow able to stand up to everything and just say, you know what, you guys have no idea what you're talking about. And I could take ownership of my experience. Mm-hmm. But my younger niece, who I talked about in another video, she couldn't. She was 17 and completely lost and wound up taking medications. But as I was trying to find out the difference between my spiritual experience and this bipolar disorder, her older sister went into crisis 4 months later, okay? In my book, I call her Eliana, all right? And Eliana had seen what happened to her sister, Anna, and called us directly. And we took care of her in our apartment for 5 days. She took off all her clothes. She tried to fly out our windows, and we've got big windows in our 13th story apartment. Yeah, but we were with her all the time. She didn't feel any pain for 3 days, so it was quite difficult. We had to kind of protect her from bumping into tables and things because she was in a state of ecstasy, And it was like the first 48 hours, she was just purely in an ecstatic state, kissing my hand, just in a state of love. And then when she came back, the ego sort of went back online, and then she was scared. And right away, she was looking at her bruises because she was a little bit bruised from bumping into walls and tables and things. Where did this come from? Where did that come from? And looking at her chest, and she could feel all of her bruises, and she hadn't felt that for 3 days, and she didn't know where they came from. Mm-hmm. So she became quite scared. But in the long run, we had this one big episode with her, which we took care of in our apartment, which was very difficult and emotional, but we did it. And then she would have 2 episodes shortly after, like within 2 months, And we were able to support her in those two in a more constructive way. And then she went back to university, finished top of her class, graduated and didn't miss anything. A year later, she had 2 milder episodes. And this is something else that's very important too, is that psychiatrists will always say future episodes get worse. But what we've seen is that when we support the episodes, they get milder. And her last episode, which was in 2008, was so mild that she went through it alone, didn't call anybody. She just sort of felt the energies going through her and just sort of worked through it on her own.
She knew kind of what was going on. She so she wasn't petrified by it.
Right.
You know what?
And it was milder.
Right.
It was important.
What really, I think, really stands out to me as you're sitting here kind of discussing this, and as you've kind of laid out these 2 different experiences over these last few videos, which is the experience you had being taken into the mental hospital, where they were kind of mean, they were totally disrespectful, they wouldn't even talk to you, they were just telling your parents everything, is maybe very sterile, very impersonal, as opposed to this, what you're kind of describing, this environment that you created for your niece, compassion, acceptance, love. This is not telling somebody that they're dysfunctional, that there's something wrong with them. This is being just very present with them, letting them experience what they're going to experience, not demonizing them for it. And that actually you're able to see that when you treat this experience with compassion and with love, that actually, a couple years later, the episodes get less and less severe, more and more easily managed. It's just such a stark contrast between the way that we're handled in a hospital and the way that we're handled by loved ones. Or even now you're doing this work with complete strangers, I guess, right? With people that may contact you.
Yeah, well, they meet me through my videos on Bipolar Waking Up.
Right.
And I get to know them, so they're never really strangers by the time I work with them.
Right. But as opposed to, this compassion that you could have even for somebody that maybe isn't your family, but just treating someone with compassion as opposed to the way that maybe we're treated in an institutionalized type setting.
And I think what helps is, people think, well, this person is insane, and they go cold on that. But if you really want to take a good look, what you're seeing is just this incredible rawness,
Well, Sean, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to expanding on this in future videos.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to leave your comment. Let us know your thoughts about our discussion, your questions about what we've shared here today. If you'd like to subscribe to Sean's channel, you'll see a link to subscribe just up here in the corner. You can also subscribe to our channel, Psychetruth, where we post a new video every day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. I'm Psychetruth correspondent Corrina Rachel. Thanks for watching.